G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day and so far that you are having a fantastic week. Now overnight we have seen a lot of escalation between India and Pakistan, and today we're going to speak about this, but we have to step back just a little bit. So we're going to look at today what has occurred overnight. We're going to give a disclaimer because there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation coming out. Then we have to roll back to April the 22nd when we really saw these already tense areas just inflate massively after a terror attack. But then also we'll be going and zooming out a lot, and we'll be looking at a strategic overview of India and Pakistan. We'll look at their militaries, we'll look at their nuclear weapons, we'll look at offensive and defensive capabilities, as well as population, GDP, and allies. So we've got a lot to go over today. Now, before we get into that, I have to thank Mud for today's outfit as well. This video may attract people that don't watch my usual content. Most of my usual content is about Ukraine and Russia. If you don't know me, I am Matthew Williams, OIM, Order of Australian Medal, Queen's Order of Australian Medal. Everyone calls me Willie, so Willie OIM. I served for years in the Australian Infantry. I served in Afghanistan, and I've spent months upon months in countries like Ukraine, or some time in Syria, some time in Israel, and all around. I try and be as unbiased as possible and just give a real analysis of events going on and try to be as open as possible about my own intrinsic biases as well. Now, a lot of people may ask, Willie, are you going to travel to these locations? Now, as most of you are probably aware, I am undergoing chemotherapy at the moment. I have several months to go. Now, at a very minimum, I'd need blood work done, but the maximum time I could stay, even if I left today, would be under 2.5 weeks, given Australian travel and everything. It's really just not enough before my next round. So if things heat up, maybe. Okay, so we're going to take a bit of a step back. Since the 22nd of April, these tensions have been growing since that terror attack we saw in the Kashmir region. Now, we'll just jump onto the maps very, very quickly. We'll explain this more in a second, but here we have Pakistan, India, and then we have these contested regions. Most of our focus is going to be around Kashmir, but we'll explain some of the others around here. Now, overnight, these tensions have really come to a pinnacle, I guess, well, it might be still increasing, of strikes between India and Pakistan. Now, what exactly is going on? We'll go over that. But as we have previously stated with war, is walking away, walking back from the edge of war. It is far more difficult than walking up to that edge and jumping off. In hindsight, yeah, maybe easier, but walking up that edge is very easy. Walking back 4 states is very, very difficult. Now, if a full-scale war were to break out between India and Pakistan now, it would not be the first conflict between nuclear-armed states, but it would be the first war between 2 declared nuclear powers, not clashes, disputes, or fighting through proxies. And of course, this makes it uniquely dangerous and historically unprecedented in terms of risk. So, as I said, today we're going to give a brief overview what happened on the 22nd of April, what are these areas, what is happening right now, as well as the capabilities, the allies, and ability to fight also. So, long introduction, but let's get stuck into it. So look, let's start at today. You can probably see my folders here. So I have today, then we have some background, and then we have the strategic overview. And I think we'll go in that order, and people I'll see in the video will drop off as we go, but that is fine. So Operation Sindoor has been launched, and this comes from India's Ministry of Defence. Operation Sindoor. Indian armed forces carried out precision strikes at terrorist camps. So the strikes that we're seeing, India is claiming, are on terrorist camps. Now, what we are getting information is that at least 8 civilians have been killed. With any casualty figures, it is unbelievably hard to know, to get an idea. Inflation, deflation, very, very difficult. Okay, a while ago, the Indian Armed Forces launched Operation Sindoor, hitting terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan, and Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where I showed you on the map, from where terrorist attacks against India have been planned and directed. Altogether, 9 sites have been targeted. Our actions have been focused, measured, and non-escalatory in nature. No Pakistani military facilities have been targeted. India has demonstrated considerable restraint in selection of targets and method of execution. These steps come in the wake of the barbaric these attacks in Kashmir, the terrorist attack, which 25 Indians and 1 Nepali citizen were murdered. We'll go over this, don't worry. We are living up to the commitment that those responsible for this attack will be held accountable. There will be detailed briefing on Operation Sindoor later today, and I'll keep up to date with this. So we see a lot of missile attacks like this. And again, these are in these contested regions. We can see a lot of people here, and then we can see then these missile strikes. As far as what sort of missile this is, at this point in time, I cannot tell you. I am not whatsoever a subject matter expert in missiles, let alone the ability to determine what these weapon systems are, as especially India uses a lot of Western and Russian equipment. Now, let's go over this. Now, a disclaimer of all of this. There's so much misinformation and disinformation. If you look at the war in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Russia, it's been over 3 years and it's still incredibly difficult to find accurate information. Not only people mistaken, but people pushing propaganda also. And early on in that war, it was far worse. The situation is no different, and really this could actually end up more blurry as well. The fog of war is unbelievable, especially right at the beginning. So be very careful the sources of which you rely on. I will get things wrong. I'll likely get things wrong in this video today, but I'll do my very best to correct them as we go. So this footage here that's being shared around is being reported as India has shot down Pakistani jets, and Pakistani sources, they are claiming that they've downed 3, Indian Rafales, but of course from France, Su-30s from Russia, and MiG-29s from Soviet Union, Russia as well. Again, all of this is somewhat unconfirmed visually, or at least foggy at this point in time, because we get footage like this. This is claiming that this is Rafale, but again, many are saying that this footage is from 2021 of an accident and is old. So again, I know this isn't the best, YouTube clickbait, woohoo sort of news. We just need to take our time, geolocations, and look through the footage to make sure as well. But I will say, someone did write in the comments under this, the ghost of Islamabad, and that absolutely murdered me. Very, very dark humor, but being ex-military myself, well, dark humor is how we get by. But we're seeing footage like this, and I believe that this is newer footage, and these are Pakistani tanks rolling towards the borders in contested areas as well. Not in Indian-controlled contested areas, in Pakistani-controlled contested areas. So these tanks will go over the then equipment that these sides use, and Pakistan's reliance on a lot of Chinese equipment as well. Now, one thing that if this does step into a ground war, we're going to look at more and more is the terrain here. And I'll be giving an aspect from an infantryman. And this is very mountainous, very rugged, incredibly difficult. Now, this footage here is said to be from today, but whenever it was, it's a Pakistani anti-tank guided munitions crew. But I'm showing you this just to get an idea of the terrain in here and how difficult this is. Similar-ish to in northern Israel, where those ATGMs are so deadly due to being guided by wire on a lot of the time, or laser guided, but it works a little bit differently, like down a tunnel. Very, very deadly in an area like this. Now, the Pakistani Prime Minister, Shahbaz Sharif, has said this: the treacherous enemy has launched a cowardly attack on 5 locations within Pakistan. This heinous act of aggression will not go unpunished. Pakistan reserves the absolute right to respond decisively to this unprovoked Indian attack. A resolute response is already underway. The entire nation stands united behind its armed forces, and our morale and resolve remain unshaken. Our thoughts and prayers are with the brave officers and soldiers of Pakistan. The people of Pakistan and its forces are fully prepared to confront and defeat any threat with our strength and determination. The enemy will never be allowed to achieve its malicious aims. So it's looking like that there will be some level of response, and this is what happens. We call this on the channel the escalation ladder. It's escalate, 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 and as I said, it's far easier to walk to the edge and go off it than walk to the edge and then move back. And we see that absolute, well, let's call it edging of war. So what is some of the background here before we step into more of a strategic overview if there was wider war? And would it be nuclear? Would it be attritional? What's conventional? How's it going to look? So we need to step back, of course, to April the 22nd. And now, this isn't the first one by any means, but the most recent and significant attack in Kashmir occurred on April the 22nd near the popular tourist destination of Pahalgam in the Basan Valley. Gunmen dressed in military fatigues opened fire on a group of tourists. This resulted in the death of 25 Indian nationals, but 26 individuals overall, who are primarily Hindu men, and injuries to at least 17 others. The footage from here was horrible, and this was targeted. Eyewitness accounts indicate that the assailants, the terrorists, specifically targeted non-Muslim tourists. They reportedly asked individuals to state their religion and recite Islamic verses to identify Muslims, who then they spared, while non-Muslims, particularly men, were executed at close range. Now, the terror group, the TRF, the Resistance Front, believed to be an offshoot of Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba. Initially, they claimed responsibility for this, but then they retracted their claim after. This actually is fairly common when attacks like this happen. You get a lot of groups claiming it, and then a lot of retractions as well. You get the Spider-Man pointing meme. Now, Indian authorities, they have identified two of the attackers as Pakistani nationals. So what is this region? And again, this map isn't perfect because depending how your bias is, you may say this is incorrect or correct or one way or the other, but we get this region in here, this Jammu and Kashmir region. You can see these dotted lines around here for contested spaces, and we'll zoom in on this and we can see that Alpha, this is administered by Pakistan, claimed by India, then B, administered by India, so this is the area we saw the attacks, administered by China, claimed by India, in C up in here, administered by India, claimed by China as D. So you can see how difficult all of this is to go over, okay? So a little bit of history here. After British India split in 1947, both India and Pakistan, they claimed the region of Jammu and Kashmir. That then kicked off a series of wars and tensions that are still going on today and have really hit beyond boiling point at this time. Now, India holds the areas of Jammu, Kashmir, and this Ladakh as well, while Pakistan, they control Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan. The region's mostly Muslim with a mix of different ethnic groups. And it's seen decades of conflict, troops, unrest, but mostly it's just stomping at border checkpoints, not firing back and forth. But it's still one of the most dangerous and heavily militarized places on Earth. Now, this attack on the 22nd of April, it was believed to be a response to at least reported Indian government policies that encourage non-local settlement in Kashmir, which groups then are perceiving as an attempt to alter the region's demographic balance. So that is a quick overview there. I know it is significantly more complex than that, but again, we have to fit it in one, and I am not by any means an expert on the history, ins and outs on this specific area. So let's have a bit of an overview here. And these are some numbers that I just see as super important. So what we have is, I should have labelled this better, but we have Pakistan numbers under Pakistan and India numbers under then the title of India. So Pakistan, 250 million people, massive, massive country, a very high fertility rate. This is very important too. So their fertility rate is 3.5. Now, to have a neutral fertility rate, you need 2.1. That extra 0.1 is for child mortality, infant mortality, horrible, and women that don't have children. They have a GDP of 337.9 billion USD, but if you put in the PPP, the purchasing power parity, it works out to about 1.58, 1.6 trillion, making it the 25th largest economy. Their nuclear forces are 170 warheads. Now, India, population is 1.46 billion, the most populous country on earth. Fertility rate of 1.94. Again, below what we do see to continue growth. But to give some perspective here, Australia is at 1.77, US 1.78, UK 1.44, and the EU average is 1.5. They have a GDP of 3.94 trillion USD, but if you put in purchasing power parity, it's estimated around 15 trillion. So it's the third largest economy. And their nuclear forces of 172 warheads. 2 more, realistically, is not going to make the difference if those start getting flung around. But both India and Pakistan, they have developed nuclear delivery systems across air, land, and sea platform. And given the distance between the nations, there's not going to be the warning time like some ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles, we may see between the typical nuclear states when you think of nuclear weapons of, well, Russia or the Soviet Union, previous 91, and the US. There's not going to be that time, that early warning and ability to try and intercept as well. Now, strategic doctrines around nuclear weapons, this shifts a little bit. So India, they adhere to the no first use, the NFU nuclear policy, and they're committing to using nuclear weapons only in retaliation. Pakistan, they maintain a more ambiguous stance, reserving the right to use nuclear weapons first in response to a conventional military threat that it perceives as existential. So very similar to, say, like Russia's nuclear doctrine, existence of the state, then it can have a first strike policy. So let's break this down a little bit more, because realistically, no one wants to see nuclear weapons getting thrown around. So we'll go more conventional. So India, active military personnel, 1.46 million, reserve 1.15 million. So 2.5, just over million people ready to rock and roll. Main battle tanks, you're over 4,000. The key model here is really the export variant of the T-90 from Russia. Armoured vehicles, unbelievable numbers. Of course, a lot of this is old Soviet equipment and a hell of a lot of artillery pieces. A lot of aircraft, a lot of fighter jets, and some of the notable ones in here is, of course, the French Rafale, MiG-2000s, and Su-30s as well. And there are orders going in at the moment, and a bit of a fight between, is it going to be Su-57 or F-35? Now, naval assets, 293, 2 aircraft carriers, 18 submarines, and destroyers. Some of those nuclear weapons can be fired, I believe, from the submarines as well, which is a capacity that Pakistan does not have. Now, this is where I think this is very, very important, and this is India's greatest strength, is in its allies and its balance of sovereignty and independence. So its key allies, you can see listed here: Russia, US, France, Israel, Japan, Australia, UAE. So very broad, and of course, it's a major part of BRICS. Now, we've discussed this a lot recently, that India likely, for a massive economy, it does, for when we compare to other nations, has the most well-balanced approach to independence and sovereignty. Remember, for independence and sovereignty, it rests on 3 key pillars: trade, military, and energy. Now, if you're not independent on those, what you want is a healthy balance of other nations, so no single state or bloc can apply pressure and completely then choke you off. This is a concern we have raised with a lot of European states, that yes, they've cut off Russian gas and oil, but then that energy reliance has gone onto the US, as well as their trade, now as well as their military, and that sovereignty independence really comes down to a single state can have a huge then effect. India balanced this very well. anti-ship missiles from Russia, aircraft from the West. Now, and I think this is an important point with these nations. As of 24, approximately 35.5 million people of Indian origin reside outside India, making it the world's largest diaspora. So people being out of the country. And this is, of course, growing quickly. This gives India very large influence outside their borders and in many democratic states, particularly the US, Canada, UK, Australia. A lot of power in those nations and a lot of representation too. That's, I believe, very important if we were to see larger war. Pakistan, active military personnel, 650-ish thousand, reserve 550,000. So you're talking about 1.2 million, around about half. Main battle tanks, 2,500. The key model here is the Al-Khalid, which is basically a Chinese variant of the Russian T-90. Of course, there's some old T-series tanks there as well, but very reliant on China. A lot of artillery systems and a lot of armoured vehicles. The armoured vehicle range typically for Pakistan is massive. Total aircraft, you're talking about 1,400. Fighter aircraft around 300, JF-17s, F-16s, Mirage, and JC-10. That's very notable there too. But as far as airworthy planes, a lot put this number much lower, around 400 to 600. Now, Navy submarines is at 8, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that Pakistan has the ability for nuclear weapons from submerged submarines. Frigates at 10. This is important here. Recent modernisation and capabilities. Air defence is China's HQ-9 system. Fighter jets, the Chinese J-10C. And drones is the Turkish Bayraktar TB2, which we saw have a lot of early success in Ukraine. But like all weapons will tail off as defensive measures get brought up, unless it's a very simple system. Pakistan's key allies: China, Turkey, Saudi, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Iran. So China by a mile is the main power amongst these. Of course, Turkey being a NATO country, reins can somewhat be put on it, and other nations as well. In OPEC, in Brink, there's a lot of problems get raised. But one of the biggest ones in here, and I should have put it in its own column, but is the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the Muslim World. It's not mentioned above, but one of the most powerful nations in here, growing exponentially quickly, is Indonesia. Now, Pakistan's sovereignty is unbalanced. Its military is fairly strong and independent thanks to its nuclear weapons and local production. But when it comes to trade and energy, Pakistan depends heavily on other countries, especially China and the Gulf states, not the amount of balance that India has, more reliant on a few. This makes it vulnerable to outside pressure and limits its ability to act fully on its own. Now, approximately 9 million Pakistanis live abroad, forming one of the largest diasporas as well. UK, 1.6 million, US, 690-ish thousand, Canada, 300,000. So that's very large too. So we need to take into account that influence in democratic countries and unrest as well. Now, this is where there is some problems between Russia and the US, because people go, well, hang on, India tends to be their top two, is Russia and the US. That's weird. Yes, India's in a very, very funny, balanced spot. And this is something I'll be going over more, is the balance of India and Hinduism and Modi and all of that. But both Russia and the US, there is Cold War mistrust, and they always approach then Pakistan with strategic caution. So for Russia, there's long-standing distrust. They saw Pakistan as a tool of US influence in Asia. The best example of this is US and Pakistan cooperation in the Soviet-Afghan war, bringing in weapons, delivering weapons all to Mujahideen to then fight the Soviets. US, they supported Pakistan during the Soviet-Afghan war to fight the USSR via proxy. But they've also accused Pakistan of harbouring terrorists, especially after Osama bin Laden was found in Pakistan in 2011. Now, again, I'm sure that this harbouring of terrorists, supporting terror organisations, fighting all this, I'm sure that there's no relation here whatsoever when we take then 50 years and compress it into what we're seeing now. Now, I'll say from my own experience as well, that it was being reported when I was in Afghanistan that some of the explosives that were in some of the IEDs, that their point of origin was Pakistan. Okay? Now, conventional war, let alone, let's for a minute take out the nuclear threat here. The disparity in these figures that I've shown you, it does look startling. But if we'd done this at the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, it would have looked very, very similar. Now, I believe, and this may prove me wrong and it might get clipped, that Pakistan has enough conventional military strength, given the terrain, to lock India into an attritional conflict, much like Ukraine has done with Russia. Now, this does not mean that Pakistan would win, no. But just as Russia is discovering, it means that such a war can become incredibly costly, protracted, and attritional in the phase of man, economy, allies, all of that. So, again, it's not going to be a simple rollover if this then bubbles and bubbles. And again, India needs to take into account first strike policies of the existence of the state of nuclear systems too. So what is most likely here? Again, I don't know how you get to that edge and then come back on the escalation ladder. It's very, very difficult. But going over that edge is going to be a catastrophe in countries that are so heavily populated with very powerful militaries, powerful allies as well. But John Mearsheimer, he says that we've been a little bit deluded since the end of the 20th century, that we believed that no great state nuclear wars, great state nuclear powers, not nuclear wars, but nuclear powers are ever going to fight. When he says no, again, these states, they want to seek either local or international hegemony, that there will end up being those. We can talk on more of that if you'd like. But Legends, I hope that you have a fantastic day. And I'll speak to you tomorrow, and I'll keep following this, and you can look on the Telegram for any, live updates as we go. Easy. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.